While Star Wars canon has had several stories so far emphasizing that cloning projects have thus far been unable to replicate the original midichlorian count of a donor, the Legends expanded universe didn't handle this quite the same way. Legends was full of cloned Force sensitives, and we'll be talking about every single one of them today. The long tradition of cloning Force sensitives goes back to the roots of the expanded universe. While the Thrawn trilogy definitely was not the first published material outside of the movies, it is pretty foundational to its newfound success in the 90s, so maybe it's better to call this the trunk rather than the roots. In any case, within the Thrawn trilogy, we meet Joruus C'baoth, the mad clone of a long-dead Jedi Master from the Old Republic, Joruus C'baoth. Joruus was left as the guardian of one of the Emperor's storehouses of secret technologies, including everything from cloaking devices to cloning cylinders, and those cloning cylinders will be playing a big role in this list. The C'baoth clone became a tentative ally of Grand Admiral Thrawn, using his Force connection to coordinate Thrawn's forces in precision tactics, using a technique called battle meditation, where a Force wielder basically connects with the minds of others to engage in a level of micromanagement which would make a fast food chain blush. In particular, Thrawn used this technique to coordinate between cloaked ships, which he hid within planetary shields, and his fleet outside of the planetary shields. Normally, cloaked ships of this type were unable to communicate. The cloaks were double-blind, meaning no one could see in or communicate in, but also no one could see or communicate out. With battle meditation, this changed, so he'd be able to fire a turbo laser shot from outside the shield, and time that from firing within the shield, making the planets think that he could just bypass the shields entirely, and usually making them surrender and rejoin the Empire. Other famous practitioners of the battle meditation technique include Bastila from Knights of the Old Republic and Emperor Palpatine. C'baoth was not particularly interested in Thrawn's aims, and he hoped to gain at least one apprentice as part of their deal. Specifically, he wanted Luke and Leia. When Thrawn failed to live up to his end and capture the pair, and Luke also managed to escape from Joruus himself, Joruus took matters into his own hands and tricked Thrawn's second-in-command, Captain Gilad Pellaeon, into cloning a copy of Luke, using the hand Vader severed on Cloud City. Vader himself had already considered doing this before, and Palpatine told him no. But C'baoth went ahead with it, and the result was Luke Skywalker. Notably, the way that these clones determined their names was taking their original name and then adding a vowel somewhere. So this is Luke with two U's. This trend does not continue elsewhere. Both Joruus and Luke were slain by Mara Jade in a duel with her and the original Luke, and both showed the Legends version of why cloning Force sensitives was difficult. It wasn't about recreating the M count, it's that they tended to go mad. This is usually explained as partially the result of a Force connection between the original and the clone, where often memories from the original would start flooding the mind of the clone. So you also kind of get a thing where clones in Legends, especially Jedi clones, weren't even really treated as functional people in a lot of cases unless they'd overcome this. The next major example of Force sensitivity in a clone, though, is Emperor Palpatine, who returned to life in a similar way to his canon version, where his spirit inhabited a series of quickly degenerating clone bodies made in secret on the planet Biss in the deep core. These bodies were able to use the Force, though they couldn't sustain his tarnished spirit for long, forcing Palpatine to try to possess the young son of Han and Leia, Anakin Solo, before Palpatine was shot by Han and killed for the final time. His spirit attempted to latch on to Anakin, but was intercepted by Order 66 survivor Empatejayus Brand, who sacrificed himself to pull Palpatine into the afterlife and prevent another return for the Emperor. Sadly, this also prevented him from liking the video and subscribing for more, something that you can actually still do. Jumping back in time a bit, we have some earlier versions of cloned Force sensitives. There is one honorable mention I want to throw in there first, where Anakin defeats Count Dooku in Star Wars The New Droid Army, a Game Boy Advance game. The Dooku killed here gets retconned as a doppelganger of the real Dooku, something which does get referenced in the book Yoda Dark Rendezvous, so it's not exclusively in that game. But this is not, strictly speaking, a clone, and was instead determined to be some manifestation of the Force. The next example we're going to talk about is definitely a clone, but not a particularly good one. This was a clone of Darth Vader, created on Dantooine in the Galaxy of Fear series in the ruins of a Jedi enclave on Dantooine. So next time you're playing Knights of the Old Republic, keep in mind these guys had a bunch of cloning tanks. Vader had apparently made a trip to Dantooine before the events of the book, where he'd left behind some blood that was used by cloning droids to make a copy of the Sith Lord, even replicating his armor visually and arming him with a lightsaber. Although much like his armor, this lightsaber looked the part, but it didn't actually function how you'd expect, instead just being a beam of light. This Vader was killed in a duel with the real Vader, and both made significant use of the Force in the battle, so we know that transfer worked here as well. Under Palpatine's rule in general, the creation of Force-sensitive clones was pretty common, and experimented on as a way to make new apprentices for everyone, along with experimental trooper types. One of the latter came from one of Palpatine's Emperor's hands, Sa Kui, who was a dark Jedi with unwavering loyalty to the Emperor. Sa was eventually sent by Palpatine to kill Vader, knowing that he'd lose as a test Palpatine was setting for Vader, although Sa was more than willing to follow the Emperor's instructions. Sa ambushed Vader in the convenient location of a major cloning company, Arcanian Microtechnologies, and while Sa was defeated by Vader as everyone expected, Vader did take samples of Sa's DNA to be the template of a series of Force-sensitive stormtroopers, trained under another of the Emperor's hands named Shavon. This ultimately ended up with Vader killing Sa several more times, along with Shavon. This was because Shavon and the team of Sa clones who were equipped with stormtrooper armor and lightsabers were attempting to assassinate Palpatine. I haven't been able to find too much of the background on this, but there were early concepts in Star Wars where the lightsabers were going to be a much more common weapon, and stormtroopers would have been using them regularly. So this could be a nod to that, but it could also just be independently coming up with the idea that lightsabers were cool and let's give some stormtroopers a lightsaber. But Vader continued to be at the center of cloning experiments with his attempts to create an apprentice for himself. We already mentioned his consideration of cloning Luke for this purpose, which Palpatine interfered to prevent, but Palpatine was less successful in preventing Vader from cloning his secret apprentice, Galen Marek, aka Starkiller. Vader produced several defective clones of Marek on Kamino, most succumbing to personality defects as so many clones often did, but Vader did also consider the clones being too close to the original Marek in temperament to be a defect as well, so there's a lot of leeway there. One did manage to pass all of his requirements, and this one became known as the Dark Apprentice. Another clone of Marek had actually managed to escape and join the Rebel Alliance. This one had been defective in that he was focusing too much on elements of Galen's former life and wasn't into the whole Sith thing so much. This clone joined the Rebel Alliance, participating in an assault on Kamino and actually capturing Vader, meaning there was a point where the Rebels had Vader as a prisoner of war. This battle ended before the Dark Apprentice could assist Vader, meaning the replacement light side and dark side Starkillers end up out in the wild, unaccounted for by the time Legends ended. Kamino was responsible for 2 more of our Force-sensitive clones. Both of these clones were made from the same template, Jedi Knight Fallon Gray, and were known as X1 and X2. Both served as soldiers in the Clone Wars and even participated in Order 66. But in the aftermath, X1 remained loyal to the Empire, while X2 deserted, instead helping the Jedi. In a battle on Dantooine, which is apparently a Jedi clone hotspot, X1 killed Fallon Gray and nearly killed X2. The pair dueled once again in the background of Empire Strikes Back at Hoth, where X2 was apparently in the Rebel base and was one of actually, I think, several Jedi that end up in this position, and X1 was present on the Empire side, surprised at X2's survival. After Palpatine's death, X1 set himself up as one of the many Imperial warlords, operating over the planet Mustafar with his own executor class as a flagship. Luke went to stop X1 but was captured, and the plan was to create an army of Luke clones, though X1 was killed by X2 before this could happen. Luke then promoted X2 to the rank of Jedi Master, and keep in mind this was like a year after Endor, so the source here, Battlefront Elite Squadron, isn't necessarily one that meshes super well with other lore of the expanded universe. The next clone Jedi came from within Luke's Jedi Order as well, but in a different way. The planet Kham was home to the Khamite species, who believed they'd basically reached perfection sometime before the Empire. So they began just cloning themselves and perpetuating their society exactly as it was through generation after generation of cloning. Sometimes Force sensitives would appear, as was the case with Dorsk 81, meaning the 81st generation of clones of a guy named Dorsk. Dorsk 81 was considered a failure because of his differences to his predecessors, including the Force sensitivity, and left with Luke to train at his Jedi Academy. Unfortunately, Dorsk was killed during an attack by Imperial Admiral Natasi Dala, becoming part of a frankly unacceptably high casualty rate for Luke's students up to this point. He was then replaced at the Academy by his successor Dorsk 82, who turned out to be Force-sensitive as well. Dorsk 82 was killed during the Yuuzhan Vong War, protecting a crowd of droids from being handed over to the Yuuzhan Vong, who considered droids and other mechanical technology heretical and wanted to wipe them out across the galaxy. We don't know much about the fate of Dorsk 83, other than the fact that Dorsk 82 had hoped he'd follow in his and 81's footsteps, so it's most likely that he was in the same boat of being a Force-sensitive clone. The final set of Force-sensitive clones we'll be talking about come from much later in the timeline, showing up over 40 years after the Battle of Yavin, though they were created during Thrawn's campaign, 3 decades earlier. These clones, known collectively as the Community, were a series of Jedi and Sith hybrid clones. Ostensibly, this was done so that the clones could use both dark and light side powers, which is a whole weird thing and probably not something we can get into right now. The idea that they were being genetically good or evil, and that the reason that lightsiders couldn't use dark side powers was some inherent limitation, or that darksiders couldn't use light side it doesn't make all that much sense, but it's kind of beside the point right now, so we won't worry about that too much. What we do know is a series of these clones were made on Thrawn's orders by a secret Imperial research facility where the clones were raised under a lot of scrutiny, and like Luke and Joruus, went kind of mad. When Jaden Korr, an apprentice of Kyle Katarn, arrived at the facility they'd been raised in, he finds the scientific staff and the stormtroopers guarding them sliced into slowly decomposing pieces. He'd been drawn to the Community by Force visions of Jedi he knew calling out for help. Included in this community were originally 8 subjects, known as Subjects A through H, though this expanded after Thrawn's death to include another clone later known as Soldier, since the clones all gave themselves different names. Included in this group were Alpha, a clone of Kam Solusar, Seer, a clone of Dark Lady Lumaya, Runner, a clone of Kyle Katarn, Hunter, a clone of Mara Jade, and then also Rye, Maker, Two-Blade, and Scar, who don't have identified sources, though at least one of them is a Jedi named Lassen, who was introduced as a member of Luke's Jedi Order by Cross-Current and Riptide, the books where this takes place. Since these clones were developed under Thrawn's supervision or on Thrawn's orders, then these had to be people who existed and were known to be Force-sensitive before Luke actually restarted the Jedi Order. Soldier was the exception there and was based on Jaden Korr. The Community even begun having kids, with 3 children named Grace, Blessing, and Gift being born to at least the Mara and Kam clones, although one of them might have had different parents. Some of the Community, including Gift and Rye, had been killed by the time Jaden met them, and the Community was falling prey to a sickness that resulted from their creation as clones, accelerated thanks to them being exposed to lignin crystals, a type of force-focusing crystal brought forward in time 5,000 years by a Sith Lord who had come to the present from the Great Hyperspace War thanks to a hyperspace accident. Suffice to say, these books had a lot of weird stuff going on. Soldier, the clone of Jaden, was the only one to not be susceptible to this, and by the time the book is over, only Soldier and Grace remained alive from the Community, working with Jaden to escape the Sith Lord and an ancient Rakatan station, created by the creators of the Starforge from Knights of the Old Republic, which Seer had taken them to, thinking it would be their salvation. This station had been calling out to Seer and became known to the Community as Mother. In the process of all this, Jaden had also become the target of a plot by the One Sith, a hidden sect of Sith in the galaxy who planned to clone him yet again and imprint his memories on the clone, using this new clone to infiltrate Luke Skywalker's academy. This was only one of a series of imposters where the One Sith intended to kidnap and kill the originals, create clones, and have those clones infiltrate the galaxy in different ways, so there may have been other Jedi involved as well. The real Jaden Korr was killed, but thanks to his apprentice's quick actions, the device meant to imprint the memories, called a Rakatan Mind Spear, was used too early and allowed the original Jaden's personality, and maybe even his actual spirit, to win out, taking control of the body. His apprentice switched their clothes and gave Jaden's new body mostly matching injuries, keeping what had truly happened a secret to even Jaden himself. That's going to do it for our breakdown of the cloned Force users of Star Wars Legends. Of course, when trying to talk about every single one of something, it's easy to miss something, so make sure to check the comments to see which ones I've missed, or leave a comment yourself if you know of one that I did miss. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and if so, remember to leave a like and subscribe for more. Thanks for watching.